Boeing 777 disappears. 239 people vanish. No distress call, no confirmed crash site, and more than a decade later, no one can say with certainty what happened. This is the story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, and it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the modern age. On March 8, 2014, MH370 departed Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing. On board were 227 passengers and 12 crew members. The flight was expected to take less than 6 hours. Nothing about that night appeared unusual. The aircraft was a Boeing 777, one of the safest and most reliable airliners ever built. The weather was calm. No significant technical issues had been reported. The crew was experienced. The route was routine. Everything suggested this would be an ordinary flight. At 12:41 a.m. local time, MH370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The aircraft climbed normally. Communication with air traffic control was routine. For nearly 40 minutes, nothing seemed out of place. Then came a routine handoff. The aircraft was approaching the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. Controllers instructed the crew to contact the next sector. The reply was brief. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Those would become the last confirmed words ever transmitted from the cockpit. Minutes later, the aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. To civilian radar systems, MH370 simply disappeared. And for many years, people assumed this was the moment the mystery began. But investigators would later discover something extraordinary. The aircraft had not vanished, at least not yet. Military radar operators had continued tracking an unidentified aircraft after MH370 disappeared from civilian screens. When investigators reviewed that radar data, they found something unexpected. The aircraft had turned around. Not slightly, not gradually. It had abandoned its planned route. Instead of continuing toward Beijing, it crossed back over the Malaysian peninsula and headed west, out over the sea, into the darkness. Why would a commercial airliner suddenly leave its assigned route? Who made that decision? And why did nobody on board report a problem? Those questions remain unanswered to this day. But the course change was only the beginning, because investigators would soon uncover evidence suggesting the aircraft continued flying long after it vanished from radar. Not for minutes, for hours. Nearly 7 of them. 7 hours without communication. 7 hours without a distress call. 7 hours without anyone knowing exactly where the aircraft was. And if that sounds impossible, investigators thought so too. Because if nobody could see the plane, how could anyone possibly know it was still flying? The answer would come from something nobody initially considered. Not a radar station, not another aircraft, but a satellite. And what that satellite revealed would completely change the investigation. When MH370 disappeared from civilian radar, investigators faced an immediate problem. They had no distress call, no confirmed crash location, and no way of knowing where the aircraft had gone. At first, many assumed the plane had crashed somewhere in the South China Sea. It seemed like the most logical explanation. The aircraft disappeared, the signal was lost, and then, nothing. But as investigators searched the expected area, a different picture began to emerge. Military radar data revealed that MH370 had turned back across Malaysia. That discovery alone raised serious questions, but it was still only part of the story. Because even after military radar lost the aircraft, something else was still receiving signals from it. Not messages, not voice transmissions, just automated electronic handshakes. The source was an Inmarsat communications satellite orbiting thousands of kilometers above Earth. At first, these signals seemed insignificant. The aircraft wasn't transmitting its location. It wasn't reporting its altitude. It wasn't sending any emergency message. But investigators soon realized those signals contained something incredibly valuable. proof that the aircraft was still powered, proof that it was still communicating, and most importantly, proof that it was still in the air. This was the moment the investigation changed, because MH370 had not disappeared when radar contact was lost. It had continued flying, hour after hour, long after the rest of the world believed it was gone. Using the timing of those satellite handshakes, analysts began reconstructing the aircraft's possible path. They couldn't determine an exact route, but they could estimate the aircraft's distance from the satellite at different moments. The result was a series of enormous arcs stretching across the globe. One possibility led north into Central Asia. The other led south into the Indian Ocean. Investigators now faced a new mystery. Which path had the aircraft taken? Over time, additional analysis narrowed the possibilities. The northern route became increasingly unlikely. The southern route fit the available data far better. If the calculations were correct, MH370 had continued flying deep into the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote regions on Earth, thousands of kilometers from its intended destination, far from major shipping lanes, far from populated coastlines, and far from help. But another question remained. Why had the aircraft flown there? Was someone controlling it? Had the crew become incapacitated? Was it a deliberate act? Or was something else happening entirely? The satellite data answered one question. MH370 kept flying, but it created many more. And if investigators knew roughly where the aircraft had gone, why couldn't they find it? That question would trigger one of the largest and most expensive search operations in aviation history. And despite years of effort, the aircraft itself remained missing. If investigators knew where to look, why did they fail to find the plane? And how could a Boeing 777 disappear in the age of satellites, radar, and global surveillance? To answer that question, we need to follow the search. And what investigators discovered there would only deepen the mystery.
If MH370 had flown into the southern Indian Ocean, investigators believed they finally had a place to search. But finding a missing aircraft in one of the most remote regions on Earth would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. Search teams began combing vast stretches of ocean. Ships crossed thousands of miles. Aircraft scanned endless horizons. Underwater vehicles searched the seafloor. The operation would eventually become the largest search effort in aviation history. And yet, despite years of work and hundreds of millions of dollars spent, the aircraft remained missing. Why? Part of the answer lies in the ocean itself. The southern Indian Ocean is enormous. Violent weather, powerful currents, and extreme depths make it one of the most challenging environments on the planet. In some areas, the seafloor lies more than 6,000 meters below the surface. Investigators weren't searching for a building, or even a city. They were searching for the remains of a single aircraft, somewhere across an area larger than many countries. And there was another problem. Nobody knew the aircraft's exact route. The satellite data suggested where MH370 might have gone, but it could not reveal every turn, every altitude change, or every decision made during the flight. Search teams were working with probabilities rather than certainty. And then, more than a year after the disappearance, something unexpected happened. In July 2015, a piece of aircraft debris was discovered on Réunion Island, a small French island in the western Indian Ocean. The object was identified as a flaperon, a component from the wing of a Boeing 777. Investigators later confirmed it came from MH370. For the first time, there was physical evidence. Proof that the aircraft had not vanished without a trace. Proof that at least part of it had entered the ocean. Additional debris would later be discovered along the coasts of Africa and other islands in the Indian Ocean. To many investigators, these discoveries strengthened the theory that MH370
had ended its journey somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. But even these findings created new questions. If debris could drift thousands of kilometers across the ocean, could investigators be searching in the wrong place? Had ocean currents carried the evidence farther than expected? Or had the original search area been incorrect from the beginning? Years passed. Search zones expanded. Technology improved. New expeditions were launched. Yet the main wreckage was never found. And without the wreckage, investigators were missing the one thing they needed most: answers. What happened inside the cockpit? What happened inside the cabin? Why did the aircraft change course? And who, if anyone, was controlling it during its final hours? Those questions remain unanswered today. And because they remain unanswered, alternative theories continue to exist. Some focus on the crew, others focus on outside interference, and a few venture into far stranger territory. But before we examine those theories, we need to ask a difficult question. Was the disappearance of MH370 the result of a deliberate act, or was something else responsible? The most widely discussed theory points toward a man sitting in the cockpit, the captain. But does the evidence actually support that conclusion? Or is the story far more complicated? Somewhere in the darkness of the southern Indian Ocean, the final chapter of this story may still be waiting to be discovered. And until it is, the mystery of MH370 remains unsolved. Next time on Archive X, a man boarded a commercial airliner carrying a briefcase. During the flight, he claimed it contained a bomb. He demanded $200,000 in cash. He got it. Then he jumped into the night and was never seen again. His name wasn't D.B. Cooper, but that is the name history remembers. And more than 50 years later, nobody knows what happened to him. What do you think happened to MH370? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy evidence-based investigations into history's greatest mysteries, subscribe to Archive X, because the investigation never ends. The truth is still out there.